Hello, I'm Adrian, and I've been a fan of Godzilla for as long as I can remember, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to collect virtually every single DVD or Blu-ray for his movies as of this recording. I thought it would be fun to revisit all of these films as an adult. I've never before seen them in chronological order, one after the other, so for the past couple weeks I've been watching all 38 of them, now 39, jotting down notes, and then typing up my thoughts on every single Godzilla film released over the past 70 years. Considering we're getting more Godzilla content than ever before, with Monarch, Godzilla Minus One, and Godzilla x Kong releasing months from one another instead of literal years, I thought it would be a perfect time to undergo this journey. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that there will be spoilers littered throughout the video, but I highly encourage you to watch all the films yourself, as most of them are available on DVD or Blu-ray and are also streaming on Pluto TV as of the making of this video. Although Monarch is live action, I won't be including it in this review as I plan on making a follow-up video exploring the various Godzilla shows as well. Originally, I intended on releasing this all as one video, but once I saw just how long it was going to be, I decided to split it into Godzilla's different historical periods, which are Showa, Heisei, Millennium, along with Reiwa and Legendary, which are running concurrently. Without further ado, relax, sit back, and enjoy the ride. We begin with the very first Godzilla film. It's a historic film not only because of how it works as a harrowing metaphor for nuclear war, it's extraordinarily well made for the time, and the compositing involved in many of the special effects shots remains some of the very best in the series to this day. The lighting is fantastic, and despite being a man in a large rubber suit, Godzilla looks very convincing in several shots. It truly does look like lost newsreel footage of the time. This actually makes a ton of sense, as the director of the film, Ishiro Honda, had first-hand military experience, having been drafted into the Japanese Imperial Army, and witnessed first-hand the aftermath of the destruction of Hiroshima as he made his way home. The man in charge of the special effects, Eiji Tsubaraya, originally wanted to make Godzilla a stop-motion creature just like Ray Harryhausen, but was informed that it would take 7 years for them to make it in the same level of quality as Ray did, and he only had 3 months, so he opted for putting a man in a suit. Originally, the monster was going to be part whale and part gorilla, hence the Japanese name Gojira, which is sort of a portmanteau of those two words. However, he opted instead with making Godzilla a sort of combination of dinosaurs, the two most notable ones being Tyrannosaurus Rex and Stegosaurus because of the plates, or dorsal fins. With the help of his team that for years had been making war films, he made said dinosaur suit look incredible for the time. Akira Ikofube is the man responsible for scoring this film, and several other Godzilla films, and he is the one who came up with the iconic Godzilla themes that we heard as recently as Godzilla Minus One. So thanks to these three visionaries, Godzilla as we now know him was created. Despite the overwhelming awesomeness of several of the special effects, there are a couple of clunky ones involving using a Godzilla puppet, which were unfortunately revisited in the sequel, as well as some using literal toy firemen, but these shots are few and far between. What you may or may not know is that there are two vastly different versions of the film. The original 1954 Japanese version, Gojira, and the heavily re-edited Americanized version with new scenes starring Raymond Burr that was renamed Godzilla King of the Monsters. I have the Masterpiece Edition, so I went ahead and viewed both. And oh boy does that American version mess with the original. The American version inserts a brand new reporter character and uses him as a framing device for the rest of the film. What this results in is a bunch of brand new extraneous scenes where they try to shoehorn him into things that actually happen in the film and add a bunch of melodramatic and cheesy voiceover to it as well. He looks completely out of place in most of the scenes, as he awkwardly stands just out of frame. The lighting doesn't match the original at all, almost every single line or scene relating to the nuclear message of the film is removed, and his reporter scenes completely botch the pacing and momentum of the movie. Reportedly, every single one of his scenes were filmed in just one long, grueling day of filming, and it absolutely feels this way. I don't think anyone involved in the film imagined it would still be getting sequels to this day, but here we are, about 70 years later, and still pumped about the next Godzilla movie. But which was the very first sequel? Well, that would be... For all subsequent Godzilla reviews on this video, I'd like to note that if the Japanese version was available, I watched it in Japanese with subtitles, as I really couldn't get past the hokey English dubbing. For Godzilla's first sequel, there's a noticeable dip in overall quality with the special effects, but I'm sure this was probably a result of rushing this film out of the gate only 6 months after the first one. For being the first sequel in the series, there's still some semblance of continuity. Most notably, we have Takashi Shimura of Seven Samurai fame, reprising his role as a paleontologist, Dr. Yamane. This is extremely rare, as from this point forward in the Showa series, the same actors return, but they play completely different characters. For example, Akihiko Hirata, who played Dr. Serizawa, returns to play various other characters, such as Dr. Shigezawa in King Kong vs. Godzilla, and Dr. Mifune in Terror of Mechagodzilla. The battle sequences in the film have some really good segments. There's a very animalistic quality to the choreography of them biting and clawing at each other. However, due to a camera operator's error, some parts of the film weren't filmed in the right frame rate, resulting in a sped up, almost cartoony look to them. And it's a shame because the choreography and shot choice was totally there, but ends up being completely overshadowed by such a catastrophic error. The film also sadly uses more puppet and toy shots than the original, and they don't look very good. Godzilla, however, does win his first cinematic fight, which is something that didn't happen as often as you would think in the early days, which leads us right into I'll get into my personal thoughts on this film more when we revisit it in the long-awaited rematch Godzilla vs. Kong, but for now I'll start off with saying that giving Kong a power-up with electricity was ridiculous. For some reason, Kong becomes energized with electricity, while this is absolutely fatal to Godzilla, a weakness that would carry over in the Showa era. The film features some decent fight choreography, but the title fight lasts a little less than 10 minutes, and this is including human reaction shots and movie subplots. There are also plenty of singing sequences, something that would make a reoccurrence in later films. However, we see a dash of Godzilla goofiness that would become more prevalent as the years went on, as Godzilla has a fun little clapping motion every time something is going well for him, and his design looks more reptilian this time around. The compositing in the film with the humans is probably the worst in the entire Godzilla saga, as every monster shot with humans has a terribly noticeable blue halo around them. And perhaps most significantly, both Godzilla and Kong tumble off a mountaintop, but only Kong emerges from the sea, giving him the victory in this fight. Upon this umpteenth rewatch, I was truly shocked at how little monster action there is in the film. They have a small skirmish before their big fight where Kong walks away defeated, but other than that, the two monsters have very little screen time together, and a large amount of time is spent on the silly subplots as well as the injected American scenes to add a very fake documentary tone to the film. Continuing off the prevalence of musical interludes from the previous film, Mothra vs. Godzilla features tons of singing with the fairy twins from Infant Island. It's also exceedingly and randomly violent at the end, with the two main human villains beating each other up in an office while Godzilla's rampaging outside. The fight ends with one of them shooting the other right in the head, complete with gushing blood. I checked right away to see if this was left in the American version, and lo and behold, there is no blood-spewing forehead shot, as by this point, Godzilla was strictly for children stateside. But said other villain, in a scene that reminded me of The Lost World, and I'm pretty sure was inspired by this concept, Godzilla defeats the human villain by toppling a building over him. The fights of the film were extremely one-sided, as all throughout the movie, Godzilla takes a heavy beating. First of all, the military captures him in a giant-sized net, and, building off of his weakness in King Kong vs. Godzilla, proceeds to electrocute him for what seems like forever. As a matter of fact, he only survives not because of his resilience, but because the humans literally ran out of electricity. And then for the title fight, Mothra shows up and just completely wrecks Godzilla by throwing him around and spraying him with her silk. This is even worse than the beatdown he gets many years later by Mechagodzilla in 2023, as at least that fight was short. Here it is prolonged agony for Godzilla fans, as he struggles to fight what is essentially a big cute butterfly. As a matter of fact, he only barely wins the battle because he kind of burnt one of her wings, but guess what? She was dying anyway before she even started the fight. So her two kids are then born from the egg she left behind, and they also make short work of Godzilla, defeating him with nothing but their silk strands. The back of the DVD box proclaims this as one of his best films, and I disagree in the sense that Godzilla takes a back seat to Mothra, as well as a heavy beating. So in other words, great film if you're a Mothra fan, not so great if you're a Godzilla fan. This movie marks a significant shift in turning Godzilla to almost a pure camp schlockfest. The horror elements have completely vanished, and the film is much more silly in tone. For example, Godzilla, Mothra, and Rodan all have a monster summit, where Godzilla remarks that he and Rodan don't care about humans, and that he thinks humans bully him. A huge shift to portraying him as much more of a sympathetic character and not truly a villain as he had been portrayed up until that point. The subplot in this film involves a princess with memory loss who suddenly reappears prophesizing the end of the earth with the arrival of a powerful space monster, and this led to a couple James Bond inspired shootouts. It also marks the return of Takashi Shimura from the first film, but this time he plays Dr. Tsukamoto. This is also the first of the Godzilla movies to place a huge emphasis in throwing boulders at each other as form of combat. Rodan and Godzilla play what is basically volleyball at one point. Mothra is still in her larva form and she hasn't grown yet, but there are some cool team-up attacks as they try to take down Ghidorah. That being said, most of the action happens in the final 20 minutes of the movie. Set fighting is a bit more balanced as the monsters take and receive hits, but the choreography is a bit subpar and they are still figuring out how Godzilla fights. Moreover, Godzilla is starting to morph in appearance to his more recognizable chibi form that characterizes his Showa era, most notably the enlarged pupils and head, the shortening and flattening of the jaw, along with the shrinking dorsal fins. Continuing with the incredibly silly B-movie camp scene in Ghidorah, here too Godzilla has firmly set its foot on being almost a parody of itself. This one concerns aliens with silly outfits supposedly seeking help from humans from a terrible monster, but it turns out they were actually trying to conquer them in the first of many Godzilla films, repeating this same lesson of never, ever, ever trust aliens. Godzilla is firmly categorized as a hero as well, as we even have a line from one of the protagonists saying how he feels bad seeing Godzilla and Rodan stranded on a foreign planet. The destruction sequences are really quite good, and it's great to have Ishiro Honda still directing and Akira Kufube still composing, but it's a shame that the fights only happen near the very end of the movie, with most of the film dealing with the setup of this fight. I apologize if some of these reviews in the Showa era are a bit short, but that is because I didn't have much to say about them as they all kind of started to blend into one another in my head. In this one, we have some really well-framed semi-aquatic battles, but they are unfortunately saddled with a pretty boring plot and human characters. Godzilla doesn't show up until well over halfway through the movie, but guess what? He's sleeping! So then more time passes before he finally wakes up and takes us to the previously mentioned Godzilla fight scene. As a matter of fact, the battle sequences were so short, they were repurposed almost in their entirety for All Monsters Attack. For what it was though, it was cool to see a battle take place right in the water, considering Godzilla is an amphibious creature. This movie is notable for the first inclusion of Minilla, otherwise known as Godzilla's son, and for having quite a poignant final shot of Godzilla and Minilla frozen in the artificially created winter. But don't worry, they aren't in danger. The characters make it clear that they are just in hibernation. This is also the first appearance of Kamakuras, the big insects who mutate into giant praying mantis type monsters, as well as Kumonga, a giant spider with a deadly web. The tone of the film is also very lighthearted, with most of it taking place on a tropical set, and one of the protagonists comments again on how they feel bad about Godzilla staying on the island, further cementing his status as a heroic character. Destroy All Monsters is a Smash Bros. Of the Godzilla universe where virtually every big monster seen up until then makes an appearance to take on the threat of Ghidorah. It's scattered with plenty of unique destruction sequences, as well as a plot device of aliens controlling monsters to destroy cities around the world. This is a concept that would also be seen much later in Godzilla Final Wars, as well as Godzilla the series, where it's known as the Monster Wars trilogy. In a surprising turn of events, Ghidorah doesn't just fly away when he's defeated like before. And this time, he does get defeated on Earth. The movie has some incredibly awesome destruction sequences, along with great battle sequences featuring creative and inventive choreography. It ranks up there as one of the most overall entertaining Godzilla movies of all time, and the absolute shining jewel in the Showa era, aside from the original of course. It's no wonder then, why several decades later, the acclaimed Godzilla fighting video game took this title and added in the word melee, just like Smash Bros. Had done only a year earlier, going full circle. After spending so much money in the previous film, this film was an experiment of sorts. Instead of filming brand new sequences, how about repurposing footage from older movies to pad the running time and save on costs of filming new ones? How about repackaging them into a new product? And thus, All Monsters Attack was born. And to add insult to injury, this one was exclusively tailored for children, making for a ridiculously simplified story with a child protagonist. Our protagonist is afraid to stand up to his bully, and Minilla is also afraid to stand up to his monster bully Ebirah too. Out of nowhere, Minilla talks just like a human in this one, and is shown to have the power to shrink and grow in size, something that is also seen in Final Wars much later. The film also has a bit of a Home Alone element to it, as the kid tries to foil criminals on his own, but way too much time is spent with the bumbling thieves subplot. To its credit, at least the chosen battle shots do kind of match with one another, and the spectating part of the movie where the protagonists watch a compilation of Godzilla's greatest hits doesn't seem entirely forced if you have no idea what's going on. Godzilla vs. Hedorah is very much the black sheep of Godzilla movies. It's got a very strong environmental message, psychedelic 2D animations, curious small screen montages, rave dance sequences, a flying Godzilla, and what is highly likely the longest battle between Godzilla and any foe. Godzilla and Hedorah start to duke it out about 20 minutes into the movie, and there are a couple breaks in between as a lone suffering scientist tries to figure out a way to defeat the increasingly destructive Hedorah. But by and large, the only focus of the movie is the battle. There are no other subplots like the others, whether it's getting off an island, stopping thieves, regaining the memories of a princess, etc. It truly is a movie about Godzilla fighting Hedorah and nothing else. So if it weren't for the slow psychedelic dance sequences and some oddly long shots of a kid running across Japan, it's quite watchable, as it does show Godzilla for long periods of time. It also introduces an element that was later seen in Godzilla the series, where the humans help Godzilla defeat the monster with some piece of, usually, sci-fi technology. In this case, Godzilla does most of the work, but he couldn't have completely defeated Hedorah without the help of the human's electricity device. However, there are some aspects that did stick out to me, like the random bloody headshot in Mothra vs. Godzilla. Here, the death and body count of the film is quite high and is literally mentioned by the film, and is visually seen as humans turn into fleshy goop when they come into contact with Hedorah's goo, right before your eyes. In sum, I remember seeing and taping this one as a kid on Sci-Fi Channel, and it was just as tripping watching it now as it was then. I really liked how this one begins. It starts off with a very relatable goal of a comic book artist trying to find a job creating kaiju for a kid's comic book. Then he quite literally stumbles into a plot involving aliens trying to control kaiju with secret audio tapes. The characters all felt a little more like people this time around, which made the human scenes more entertaining than usual to watch. Godzilla takes a bit more time to appear in this one than he did in Hedorah, but it's a pretty decent fight. There's a very large destruction sequence with Gigan wrecking Japan, but it's disappointing to see that most of Ghidorah's footage has been repurposed from Destroy All Monsters. Gigan's fight with Godzilla is pretty brutal in the sense that Godzilla bleeds quite a bit, not only from a nasty shoulder cut, but on his head too. He gets a second wind near the end of the fight that isn't very well explained, but I don't know, it's Godzilla, so I guess it doesn't really matter. The way he teams up with Anguirus is pretty cool, and by this point in the series, their friendship is solidified, which gives their sequences a nice touch. I did not see the reveal that the aliens are giant cockroaches at all, so that was definitely surprising, and it also has an environmental message similar to Hedorah, but not as ham-fisted. The character work drops a bit in this entry, as we're once again back to cardboard cutout characters that don't have any real goals, needs, or wants, but the final battle sequences more than make up for it. Before we get there though, there is an attempt to make the film a bit more action-oriented, as there is an actual choreographed fight scene in this one, along with an extended car chase. That being said, there were snippets of a fight scene in Godzilla vs. Gigan as well, with the protagonist's karate girlfriend. Megalon is a kooky Godzilla villain, and him teaming up with Gigan makes a lot of sense, as they both have similar flight powers and limbs that serve to do not much else but destroy. I feel Megalon could have made better use of his burrowing abilities, but the fight we get is nothing short of awesome. Godzilla arrives cheering for himself, like if he was in a pro wrestling match, and makes short work of both Megalon and Gigan, but he's a bit too confident and the tables are quickly turned against him. What follows is a truly entertaining and extended battle that shows a lot of personality and character with the giant monsters. They somehow express disappointment, amazement, shock, and plenty of other emotions with just their body movements. The choreography at this point treats them like giant kaiju wrestlers, and I'm all for it. Godzilla throws punches like no tomorrow, counters with perfectly timed throws, and has an incredible fighting spirit that matches Jet Jaguar. Jet Jaguar also does not overshadow Godzilla in any way. I had watched this one a few years ago, and I'm glad I watched it again, as after seeing the other battles so far, this one is one of the all-time best, and I'm sure it's going to end up ranking very highly for me. Despite knowing that I was watching Mechagodzilla, it did take me a second to realize that the odd Godzilla roar in the beginning of the movie was intentional, as that was supposed to be Mechagodzilla, not Godzilla. In typical Godzilla fashion, the movie's pacing left a bit to be desired since most of the action was relegated to the last 30 minutes of the film. I remember taping this one from Sci-Fi Channel, and back then I would try to only tape the Godzilla scenes, and for some reason, my subconscious remembered the song to awaken King Caesar. Not the lyrics, of course, but the music and the melody for sure. The fight choreography, while not as inventive and fun as Megalon, was entertaining, and they did do a lot more pyrotechnical work this time, as a Godzilla vs. Godzilla mini bout at a factory was full of explosions. The aliens are monkey people this time, complete with Planet of the Apes style makeup and a very disturbing echoey chimp sound effect. This one also had hand-to-hand fights, which makes me think they were trying to incorporate more action on the human side of things more regularly. There's lots of spraying blood again, particularly with poor Anguirus getting his jaw almost snapped open by Mechagodzilla. I wish Anguirus would have popped in for the final battle, but I guess that wouldn't have fit the two-monster prophecy that is spoken about in the movie. Having the actor who played the original Dr. Serizawa, Arihiko Hirata, return to play another intelligent character, this time Professor Hideto Miyajima, was a great added detail. However, this time his character felt responsible for Mechagodzilla and wanted to destroy him. To top it all off, in a complete 180, Godzilla is now somehow powered up by electricity, becoming a living magnet instead of being weakened by it like he was in King Kong vs. Godzilla, as well as Mothra vs. Godzilla. This is the final film of the Showa era, and was once again directed by Shiro Honda and scored by Kira Ikofube. Continuity-wise, it's a bit odd, as in the Japanese version of the film, they do play portions of the previous film in the opening credits, but the same actor, Akihiko Hirata, plays a completely different character in the follow-up. This time he plays Dr. Mafune, a scientist who is obsessed with proving the scientific community wrong after they kicked him out due to his supposed crazy theories regarding an ancient dinosaur, Titanosaurus. So now he's devised a method to mind control said dinosaur and show them he was right all those years ago. But he's also got a daughter who, after a terrible accident, turns into a cyborg, courtesy of the new batch of aliens who are trying to invade Earth. They have the silliest alien costumes of all time, looking like a human version of the aliens from Toy Story, and they plan on using a newer version of Mechagodzilla to conquer Earth. As you may have noticed from the description, there is a lot going on in this movie, which means that Godzilla is relegated to appearing near the end of the film, and in this case it's right around the 50-minute mark. But when he finally does, he gets an incredibly cool reveal shot that contrasts sharply with just how cartoony and chibi Godzilla's design had become at this point. The final battle is pretty fun, a bit one-sided considering that he takes quite the beating from Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla, but he does get a couple of good hits here and there. To solidify superhero status, they even have him heroically rescue a couple of kids from getting squashed by Titanosaurus. The Godzilla destruction sequence is very well done, and their face-offs do have an incredibly cool dolly shot showing off the intricate miniatures they built for the film. The film does end quite abruptly, and the Bionic Girl sacrificing herself to stop Mechagodzilla doesn't make a lot of sense, considering Godzilla had just gotten through Mechagodzilla's barrage of weapons just fine moments earlier. Had Godzilla been about to be defeated, then it would have made more sense, but as it stands, it felt a bit unnecessary. A great detail is that the producers in charge of recutting it for American audiences were probably also shocked to learn that Godzilla doesn't appear until nearly an hour into the hour-and-a-half film, so they decided to expand the opening sequence to full-on best-of moments of Godzilla, hastily summarizing many of his previous films with some woefully cheesy voiceover. Because of this, the English version of the film is about 8 minutes longer than the Japanese version. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of this retrospective. Join me for part 2, where we will explore all of the Godzilla films in the Heisei era. And until then, let me know in the comments below which were your favorite moments and films from the Showa era. I'd like to thank each one of my Patreon members, as their contribution helped in the making of this video. If you'd like to contribute and appear in the credits in the future, my Patreon page is Godzilla Rex, and it's in the description below. Which is your favorite Godzilla movie so far? Let me know in the comments below, subscribe for more videos, and see you next time.